All right, today, top 20 sump mistakes. And this is a big one because it's hard to undo.
Yeah, you get one chance at this most cases.
So we got all of our biggest failures selecting and using sumps, and you can learn from all of our mistakes so you don't have to, starting with number 1.
Yeah, the mistake here is missing the value of a 40 breeder or a 20 long. I think these are staples in some of the, especially the DIY portion of the hobby, who's trying to do the, get a sump going on their own. Those 40 breeders make for a perfect sump for larger tanks. The 20 longs make a perfect sump for some smaller tanks. And you can just build them out the way you want.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily need to buy something like this.
Yeah.
It's all tricked out and pretty. It's just a glass box. It's going to hold some water. People do all kinds of different tricks to them to make baffles or just do what you need to do. As long as you got a glass box down there, you can actually do it. And a 40 breeder and a 20 long, look at the dimensions, and it might be the most economical sump that you could put in your tank. Number 2, I've made this mistake more than once.
Me too, and that is filling out the entire area of underneath your tank, so down in the stand, with a sump. So I did this when I had my 125. I was like, oh man, I've got all this room. Let me find out the sump that'll fit it perfectly. And I did. 1, I can't get the thing out if I wanted to. And 2, I had no room underneath my stand anymore to store things or even put calcium reactors or other stuff next to it.
I did that mistake with that Reef Savvy tank that I had in my office. Went from a 40 breeder, like a 70 gallon. And I told Rick at Synergy Reef to make me a sump as big as fits the entire area inside the stand. And it was really cool because I had tons and tons of space inside the sump.
Yeah.
But then my dosing containers were sitting next to the tank. So really make sure that you leave some room in there for anything you really don't want in there, like maybe your dosing containers. If you can, an auto top-off container is nice. Kind of hard to get a big enough one in there many times, but think about what other things need to go down there, and don't get too big of a sump. It's nice to have extra water and you have more space for equipment, but you may need space inside the stand as well. Number 3, closely related to that.
Yeah, and this is the problem that I found is I made the mistake of getting a sump that was too big to get out. So I had this, this old sump that was kind of falling apart. The seams were coming apart, and I eventually wanted to get it out. But I remember even thinking back to the way I got it in. There was only one way in, and that's with the tank off the stand and go straight down through the top. Something I could never do because everything was fit in place.
Yeah, in fact, I think it'd be nice if somebody built like a modular sump that was split down the middle and you could connect with bulkheads or something, because then I could get them in and out really easy for maintenance and stuff. But outside of that, think about maybe a sump that can fit in there. I can tell you I made that mistake too, especially with those pine stands from like Marineland that have that strip down the middle where the doors close on it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd recommend this, but I've actually pounded that strip out in the past to get the sump out. Didn't really seem like it was structurally supporting all the way, but who knows? And then pounded it back in afterward. But, make sure that you have the ability to change it because, you may outgrow this thing, system design or type of equipment you want. It's a lot easier if you can figure out how to get the sump in and out of your stand. Number 4, most people don't even think about this.
Yeah, the mistake is not deciding up front if you want filter socks. A lot of sumps have these built-in filter sock chamber. If you choose that route, you are tied to filter socks, whether you're going to use them or not. But if you don't use them, this might turn into a problem.
Yeah, so this is really the question. Am I going to change them out fairly frequently? Like at least once a week, probably every 3 days is better.
Right.
If your answer to that is yes, this is probably the cheapest and easiest filter in the whole tank. It'll probably pull out more organics and resulting nitrate and phosphate than almost any other filter on here if you change the thing out every 3 days.
Right.
If you don't, it's all just going to rot in there. Not only is it going to rot in there and start to create nitrate and phosphate, but it prevents the skimmer and your other filtration from working properly as well, because if we just let those particles go through, a lot of them would just actually go out the skimmer rather than get stuck in here. So think about what's real for yourself. Am I actually going to change these out? If not, I probably don't want them at all, because if you pull them out right now, what's going to happen is the water's going to go in and then fall down and just make a ton of noise, splash all over the place. There'll be a lot of salt creep and a big mess. And so actually you're better off with a sump design that doesn't have filter socks at all. That's just not an important part of your filtration that you're willing to maintain. Number 5, the solution to that.
The answer to this one is not making the mistake of deciding whether or not you want like a Rollermat type to do that filter, that change out work for you. It's hard in some cases to implement after the fact. A lot of sump manufacturers are making them now with them built in, but you know, in this case, if I have a filter sock that has kind of these proprietary holes, all of those modular type roller things just now don't fit, and now I cannot get a roller mat in there unless I do something else. So make that decision up front. Do I want a roller mat? Do I want to implement it later? Do I want to implement it right now?
All right, so I think there's a couple of really good options for that. One, if you have your 20 breeder or 40 breeder 20 long, you can use something like the Rollermat Compact.
Yeah.
Where now, in the end of the tank, all I gotta do is plug it right into the little port on the top of it, and I now have a roller mat running in my glass box. I saved some money on the glass box instead of getting a fancy thing, and I replaced it with the solution that actually makes it really easy to pull all that waste out. Also, you know, from these guys here with Trigger, they have an option with the Platinum series that has the roller mat already built in. It's just so much better to have it already built in than try to use all the aftermarket options. So bravo to them for solving that problem. Hopefully others do it. But if you're not going to change out the filter socks, but you still want the benefit, those felt materials or roller mats, the best option. Number 6, if you are doing your own DIY sump using like glass box, like a 20 long or a 40 breeder, a lot of people will cut acrylic, and you should know one thing.
Yeah, the mistake is that a bond for the silicone that you're going to put your acrylic up against or cement it to your glass doesn't always hold, and probably won't hold watertight or as well as you had hoped. Sometimes people have it just fall off on them.
Yeah, in fact, it works really, really crappy. We actually did an Investigates episode on this where we bought like 6 different types of silicone, including some of the ones that we sell here, as well as from the hardware store. Put a bead of it on glass, and then put a bead of it on acrylic. And the glass, man, you would break the material before you break the bond. With the acrylic, I could flick it off with my pinky. It just doesn't bond. It doesn't bond to the acrylic. So what happens when you're putting that baffle in is it'll bond to the glass box and just kind of end up wedging it in there.
Yeah.
It will work. You will be able to hold that baffle in place if you want it. But note this, it's more of wedging it in. It's not watertight. Probably doesn't need to be. But if you really want to keep the height, make sure that you wedge it in on the bottom and the top as well, not just on the side, so you can get it, you know, held in there fairly well. Number 7, the cheapest and easiest way to divide up your tank.
I love this idea after we found on the ULM series, and that is missing the Aquamesh as a baffle, which is, I mean, this stuff is porous. You can get water through there, and it's enough to keep chambers separated. They don't have to be different water levels unless you absolutely need it to be. So I can divide a Refugium chamber and a skimmer chamber with some Aquamesh that blocks all the big gunk going through. Problem solved.
So a lot of people have the baffles to like catch air bubbles, but it doesn't really work all that well.
Not
in many
always,
cases.
yeah.
So in this stuff, it comes in different sizes, and you can just buy a square of it and cut out, you know, progressively smaller if you wanted. But in most cases, material like that actually will catch those micro bubbles better than the baffles, and baffles may even create some. And then you really don't need to keep different levels in the sump all that often.
Right.
You know, it really depends on your design. But if you don't need different levels in the sump, well, I can actually just keep those bubbles out. And if I wanted to do like something like a Refugium, I can use that stuff, cut a little sheet of it, slide it in. I now created a separate area of my glass box, my sump. It's really easy to move. It doesn't even need to be glued in. You just make it a little bit bigger than the glass.
Wedge it in
and then
there.
wedge it right in. Actually, in my tank in my office, I have one that's been running for years that way. All right, number 8. So if acrylic isn't right, maybe I don't want the mesh. Glass on glass creates the best bond using the silicone, but this can be a mistake too.
Yeah, so the mistake is not being aware of the issues that come with glass. For me particularly, it was a learning curve on cutting it. One, finding glass, and then 2, cutting it, getting it just right. You know, possibility of cut. There's a safety, you know, hazard kind of with cutting your own glass and doing it this way. If you get it down pretty well, you could probably achieve it. If it's your first time, you need to practice.
We have a video actually on how to do a do-it-yourself sump, and you can go watch that. But I will tell you a couple of tips here. One, is measure 4 times, crack it once.
Yeah.
Because if it's just a tiny bit too big, and you know it has kind of a flat edge, right?
Yeah.
So you can't like scoot it in, you know, without kind of pushing in the sides. And if you end up pushing the sides, not only does this break, but sometimes the glass sides of the tank break. And worse, sometimes it doesn't always break today. It'll break later if you really wedge it in there. So you don't want to do that. You want to make it a little too short rather than too long to be able to get in there.
With silicone.
And you definitely want to take the edges of your glass and use some sandpaper to round them off so you're not cutting yourself when you're putting your hands in the tank or when you're assembling it.
I did that.
It's just actually, I found myself having to use about 3 times as much material with glass than acrylic, because acrylic's really easy to mess up or fix your mistakes. Or glass, you mess it up, you kind of really need a new piece. And so just note that there's 3 different ways to make baffles here. There's probably some other ones, but some of these are the failures with using each one of those materials. Nutrient export via Refugium.
Yeah, the mistake is not deciding on a fuge right now if that's a path you're going to go. Something we did, you know, publicly in the 160, we decided we're going to go with the fuge, and we ended up having to Dremel and cut and do all this aftermarket work. Luckily for us, the sump is out here in the open, not underneath the stand, which made it easier to do, but make that decision up front.
Yeah, it like you can decide today. Am I going to use a Refugium in my system design? Am I going to depend on that for nutrient export? I will tell you, it's probably one of the filters that is the best at maintaining ultra low nitrate and phosphate, specifically in newer tanks. You know, year 5 or 6, the corals actually become the uptake, but in the early years, this is like one of those things can actually make the road for a newer reefer so much easier. So think about whether or not you want a Refugium. My personal advice is it's probably better, ultimately requires less effort than both the filter socks and the skimmer. It might be even better in some cases than that. So think about the system design and making sure you have space for that if you want it now, because trying to do it later is a lot harder. All right, number 10, how many pipes?
The mistake is not deciding how many drains you'll need. A lot of it's just, you know, a lot of it's comes down to what your tank has and what kind of plumbing does it have. Does it have a herby overflow? Does it have a Durso with a single drain and a single return? Does it have, like, you know, the bean animal with 3 drains? But if I have 3 drains and I only have 2 on my sump, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I would say that even most of them now that use the the one overflow design inside of like a standard tank, people often use that return port and make it 2.
Yeah.
You know, so I would say 2 is the minimum amount of ports you want here. And note that I bought this fancy sump, and if I was only had 1 port here and I was going to use 2, now I got this wonky pipe that's coming in here, and I kind of missed the boat. But I'll tell you, in a lot of cases here, you're doing the bean animal overflow that has 3. So in this case, I would plumb 2 in, but I still got this one wonky one in here. Now, I will say the wonky one actually is kind of nice sometimes, because that emergency overflow, I want to put it over here or somewhere else in the sump. And sometimes, like this one, I think you can actually screw in another overflow over here or different areas of the sump. And now it makes a ton of noise when it overflows into, like these ones, I wouldn't know if the second emergency actually got used or the first one. I want it splashing in the tank saying, fix me, right?
Yeah.
And so think about how those pipes are used, and there's probably the right option for you. Number 11, how many returns? And probably more actually what this is used for here.
Yeah, so that's a mistake. Not planning for how many returns, and this is something that we've learned in the last 5 years. Having the redundancy of a second pump. The only problem is you know, if I'm going, sometimes there's manufactured sumps that only have a spot for 1. Sometimes there's no spot for a return line at all, but it goes to your tank and there's only 1 overflow into it. So decide how many returns you have and pick a sump that might help you meet those needs.
So it's really nice to have a hard connection. So a lot of sumps will actually just, you know, you run your tubes out, you know, into the tank. But if you're hard plumbing using PVC, it's actually kind of hard to get it lined up right in there. And like, what happens if I need to remove the pump and all that kind of stuff? All right, so what's really nice is actually if you can hard plumb, if there's like 2 of these over here, hard plumb right into that, and then silicone tubing, just a foot of it or so that goes down here, all the vibration's gone, it's super easy to take the pump out, but it really only works if there's enough ports up here for the amount of pumps I have. If you're only going to use 1, then you only need 1, but like it's getting way more popular these days to use 2 return pumps so that when one clogs or kicks the bucket, the other one keeps going, keeping the tank alive. And again, in many, many cases, 2 smaller pumps actually cost about the same as 1 larger one. Number 12, pump mistake. This is probably the most catastrophic of them all. Don't do this.
Yeah, the mistake is putting your heaters in your return pump chamber. That's probably the one chamber out of all of these that has the highest probability of running dry and exposing your heaters, in which case that's not the place you want your heater to be.
Yeah, so what happened is your auto top off, or you just got too lazy and didn't top off the tank, stopped, and all of a sudden, you know, you're losing evaporation, and by the end of the day, the heater is now exposed and melts through the bottom of the tank or explodes in your tank. Either one of those things is a terrible idea. So never ever in your sump put your heater in the return pump area. Put it in an area of the sump that no matter really what happens to the sump, it will always stay submerged. Number 13, super common. I made this mistake and I learned from it over the years.
Yeah, the mistake is we always tell you, and you always hear, that 2-part dosing should be done in a high flow area, and automatically we just look to our sump and we go, oh, this thing's probably a high flow. Maybe it's between the baffles or something. The mistake is not realizing that the sump's not really high flow.
It is not high flow. In many cases, it's like 3 times turnover, where our pumps are actually doing like 50 times turnover in the actual display.
Yeah.
So when I dose into this tank and I just think it's high flow, what I'm really doing is I'm taking an area that was 420 calcium, dosing a bunch of calcium, and it becomes 2,000 parts per million in that area until it dissipates. And it's actually, 3 times turnover in an hour is really slow. It's actually going to be that for a long time. You're going to see precipitation. You're going to see it form right underneath where that pump is. So one of the things that I like to do is create artificial high flow, which means put a fairly inexpensive power head, like a Hydor Corellia, in your sump, wherever you're going to dose into. So it dose right into the pump and immediately blasts out into at least a gallon of water rather than that localized area. And rather than 2,000 parts per million, maybe now you only have 450 for a short period of time. And it'll be a lot easier to avoid precipitation in the tank. Number 14, I mean, how do you not like blue, but...
Yeah, the mistake is not realizing that clear sump, like glass or just clear acrylic, is a lot easier to see inside of. And that means, when you're looking at optical sensors or you're looking at water levels and all this different parts of your sump here, I can look through and actually just see my skimmer and what it's doing down there at the pump, versus I have a dark or completely blacked out and I can't see even down on it.
So Trigger does a good job here where they've added some fun color to it with the baffles and the top, and it's blue. But I can still see through the sides of the sump. I will say there are parts I can't see through. It's a little harder to see into some of the areas depending on the angle you're at. But no, when you're picking in a color, decide if it's really important that it has that color and it's tricked out, because it can impede how easy it is to do maintenance and see problems in there and how to fix them. Number 15, the opposite is true as well.
Yeah, so the mistake is not realizing that dark is easier to hide, and in that it's not something that you always want. So if I look at my sump, it's darked out, I don't know how much detritus is in the bottom. I don't know, how much gunk or maybe a screw or something got in there that shouldn't be in there. I just can't see it.
I'm not going to tell you this is a mistake entirely. You just go into it knowing what you're doing.
Yeah.
So with that Synergy Reef sump that I had, it was all smoked out. I think they call it the shadow sump or something. I don't know. But it was smoked out, the whole thing. So semi-transparent. Here's the trade-offs. I couldn't see crap in the entire tank. I had no idea what was what anywhere in there. It was really hard to see. Couldn't see through the sides. But it looked clean.
Always.
Always. Little salt creep sometimes, but that was easy to wipe off. But other than that, if I wanted to open up the sump and take a picture of it, you couldn't see the skimmer in there, but in general, the whole thing looked clean and well cared for, even if maybe it wasn't. So know what you're doing when you're picking out those smoked out colors, and really try to decide for yourself what is the right thing for you. All right, number 16. Again, the opposite is true.
And I don't know if it's a mistake or not, but just realize that white sumps, and you see a lot of these PVC acrylic type combos, white hides salt creep really, really well, looks clean, but it also does not hide detritus. And actually, I like that in my own benefit, in that if I can see a pool or pile of dark, dirty detritus in the bottom, I know exactly where to clean.
Yeah, so there's a lot of white or acrylic or PVC sumps out there. I happen to have one in my own house, and I will tell you this. It does what he just described. You cannot really see the salt creep as easily. It doesn't stand out in the sump or out of the sump because it's white on white now. But you can see all of the garbage that builds up. And it's not as much as you think, especially if you're using like the filter rolled material or filter socks. But when I see it, it means clean me.
Yeah,
Whereas if it was dark and hard to see, I wouldn't know. Even clear is sometimes kind of hard to see. But on white is really, really easy to see. It says clean me and maintenance me, which is actually helpful to me. So I think, you know, some of the white ones are actually maybe the right solutions for me, just because it helps me know when to clean it, and I don't have to worry about the salt creep as much. 17, I wish there was more of these out there.
Yeah, and it's funny that there's not, but the mistake is not thinking about glass or rimless sumps. This is common with the Red Sea tanks. They have really nice, elegant looking glass boxes down below with baffles that you can change out, tons of extra room. But you know, especially when it comes to like hanging equipment and stuff, sometimes these acrylic ones have a lip on there that I can't really mount or something, especially like an ATO, you know, that output hose that I want to clamp on here. It's not always as easy when you got a lip, but it is when I have a rimless.
Yeah, I don't know. This one is boggles the mind, because when I first got that, I think it was the 750 XXL sump down there, like, wow, big open area, doesn't have the Euro bracing on it, really, really easy to use, looks sharp, easy to clean.
Easy to clean.
Why are there not more of these out there? And I don't have a good reason. There should be. As much as we spend on our tanks, our pumps, our sumps, all the corals and stuff in there, I don't know why somebody isn't making more glass options, because they look really polished, and not having the Euro bracing on here actually makes a lot of them a lot more easy to use. Number 18, all of these little tricked out compartments look cool, but do we really need them?
Yeah, and so the mistake here is not looking for options that have big, giant, wide areas. You know, this is a phone call that I got as customer service all the time. Will this skimmer fit in X sump? And, you know, you just kind of have to play with the dimensions and look. But sometimes, you know, these little carve outs, they're limiting on some of the gear that you can put in there. But if I have a wide open area that really all I need is a space to set the skimmer in and some heaters and I'm good to go, and I'd seek out some of those wider open areas ones.
Yeah, for me, customizable to the future. So I'm just gonna like throw this out in the universe. If you could gut this whole thing out for me, that's what I want. I would want the baffle, maybe you put magnets on it and allows me to change the size of it. Maybe it slides into some grooves, I don't know. But the ability for the sump to match the way that I reef, which changes over time without having to change out the whole darn sump. If I want to start doing a roller mat, filling up a big area over here with an aftermarket one's really easy. Trying to reconvert filter socks really hard. So, you know, if you look at some of those options that just are big open areas that don't look as tricked out, sometimes they're actually better, not just today, but long term as well. All right, number 19, you might not think about this, but you should.
Yeah, it's the opposite of using the mesh for your baffles, in that, you know, in some cases you don't need different water levels, but in others you do, especially like when it comes to your skimmer performance and optimizing it. If you run your sump at a level that wasn't intended too high for your skimmer or too low for your skimmer, having the ability to adjust the baffle to change the dynamic in that skimmer chamber actually helps to make it work better.
Yeah, so we've seen some skimmers that work best in 10 to 11 inches of water and some that work best in 6 inches of water. And you're gonna have to use stands and all kinds of other stuff. It's just way, way easier if the baffles have a really good range on them that allows you to pick how deep the water should be. Also actually nice for refugiums because you might find that in my refugium, I don't actually need it to be this deep because the Cato is really only growing on this portion of it anyways. Number 20, an oldie but a goodie.
This one rings true all the time. It's don't make the mistake of not planning for the amount of water that's going to drain into your sump when your return pumps and everything shuts off or power shuts off or something like that. If you've undersized your sump, you'll know really quick.
Yeah, you could probably do that before you buy your sump if you wanted to, just by filling it up your tank and turn it off and let it fill up in some buckets or whatever. Figure out exactly how many gallons of water is, do the math, and you can figure it out.
Yeah.
But it is probably the #1 thing when sizing your sump is knowing that when the sump turns off or the return pump stops, how the water's going to come down, will it go out of my floor, and getting that equation right. All right, so if you only heard one thing today, let it be this.
Yeah, for me, it's don't overlook those white sumps. Those things are awesome in hiding salt creep, but even better when it comes time to maintenance and you know exactly where to target.
And for me, the #1 thing that you should hear is don't do this. Do not put the heater in the return pump area of your sump. Eventually, it will lower and melt through the bottom of the sump, flood your house, or set on fire, or any number of terrible things. So whatever you do not do that.
Speaking of heater mistakes.
Oh, yeah, we do have one.
We have a whole episode on heater mistakes that we actually didn't even include that one in. So go check it out. It's right here.
Heater mistakes, top 20 or so, right here.